Destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone. Stoic mindset. There is a version of you that needs to die. Not you. Not the soul underneath all of it. Not the person with the potential and the hunger, and the quiet knowing that you were built for more. But a version of you. A constructed version. The one built from fear. From other people's expectations. From old wounds that calcified into identity. From the stories you were told so many times that you eventually stopped questioning whether they were true. That version, the one that keeps you small, that flinches from difficulty, that reaches for comfort the moment things get hard, that sabotages itself right at the edge of greatness, that version needs to be dismantled. Brick by brick. Belief by belief. Habit by habit. And then, from the rubble, you rebuild. Not the person others designed. Not the person your past dictated. Not the person your fears permitted. The person you choose to be. Deliberately. Alone. In the quiet, unglamorous, daily work of transformation that no one else can do for you and no one else can witness for you and no one else can complete for you. This is the most important journey a human being can take. And the Stoics, those ancient warriors of the mind, mapped it in extraordinary detail thousands of years ago. Welcome to Stoic Mindset. Today we go all the way in. This is destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone. If you have been searching for a channel that speaks truth without flinching, that gives you ancient wisdom sharp enough to actually change your life, hit subscribe right now. Every single week we go deeper into the Stoic philosophy that built emperors, freed slaves, and forged unshakable human beings. Join this community. You belong here. Now let's begin. The old you was built by someone else. Before you can destroy something, you have to understand what it actually is. And most people, when they think about changing themselves, they think about surface things. Habits. Routines. Disciplines. Those matter. But they are not the foundation. The foundation is this, the story you carry about who you are. And here is the brutal truth that the Stoics asked every student of philosophy to confront directly, without flinching. Almost none of that story was written by you. It was written by your parents, by what they praised and what they punished. By what they modeled when they thought you weren't watching. By what they said about you to other people and what that told you about your worth. It was written by the schools that sorted you into categories. That told you whether you were smart or not, talented or not, promising or not, based on narrow, arbitrary measurements that had almost nothing to do with the full depth of what you were capable of becoming. It was written by the culture you were born into, its values, its hierarchies, its definitions of success, its ideas about what kind of person deserves respect and what kind of person does not. It was written by every wound you absorbed before you had the philosophical maturity to understand that pain is not prophecy. That what happened to you does not define what you are capable of. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who had access to every luxury, every power, every distraction a human being could desire, sat alone every morning and wrote to himself about this. He wrote, "Look well into thyself, there is a source of strength which will always spring up if thou wilt always look." He was doing something radical for a man of his position and power. He was refusing to be defined by the role the world had assigned him. He was going inward, past the title, past the status, past the expectations of an entire empire, to find out who he actually was underneath all of it. That is where the work begins. Not with a new morning routine. Not with a new productivity system. Not with discipline or discipline's tools. It begins with the honest, sometimes devastating question. Who told me I was this person? And was that person right? Epictetus, who was born a slave, who had literally everything external stripped from him, said something that took him to a place of freedom that most people with every advantage never reach. No man is free who is not master of himself. He was not talking about political freedom. He was talking about the freedom from the internalized voices, the absorbed limitations, the invisible architecture of other people's beliefs about who you could become. That is the first thing that must be destroyed. Not you. But the prison that was built around you, often with the best intentions, sometimes without any intention at all. that has been quietly shaping the ceiling of your life ever since. What destruction actually means. When people hear the word destruction in the context of self-transformation, they often imagine drama. Burning everything down. Cutting everyone off. Making a grand gesture of breaking with the past. The Stoics had no interest in performance. Real destruction, the kind that actually leads to rebuilding, is quiet. It is internal. And it is far more difficult than any dramatic external gesture because it requires sustained, honest engagement with yourself over a long period of time. The Stoics called this process ascesis, a Greek word meaning practice, training, discipline. It is where our word asceticism comes from, but in the Stoic tradition it did not mean deprivation for its own sake. It meant the deliberate, structured practice of stripping away everything that was not essential, not to be left with nothing, but to be left with what was true. Think of it like a sculptor. Michelangelo famously said that the sculpture was already inside the marble. His job was simply to remove everything that was not the sculpture. That is what Stoic self-destruction is. Not demolishing who you are, but chiseling away everything that was added to you that was never actually part of you. The resentments that became part of your personality. The defensiveness that hardened into armor. The smallness that became a comfort zone. The cynicism that became a worldview. The fear that became a belief about what was possible. None of those things are you. They are accretions. Layers added by experience and environment and the raw survival mechanisms of a person navigating a world that was often difficult and sometimes cruel. And they can be removed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." That is the Stoic call to action. Not endless analysis of who you were or who hurt you or how the system failed you. All of that may be true. All of that may deserve acknowledgement. But at some point, the Stoics were uncompromising about this. You have to stop explaining your limitations and start dismantling them. One by one. In practice. In the actual lived experience of doing the thing that frightens you, releasing the belief that diminishes you, choosing differently than you have chosen before. That is destruction in the Stoic sense. Not drama. Not performance. Just the quiet, relentless, daily work of becoming less encrusted with what you are not. Why you have to do this alone? This truth will be uncomfortable for some people. And I want to say it with care, because it is not a rejection of love or community, or the value of human connection. But here it is. The core work of transformation cannot be done with anyone else. It can only be done alone. Not because isolation is virtuous. Not because self-sufficiency is the highest ideal. But because of something the Stoics understood with extraordinary clarity about the nature of the human will. Your proeresis, your faculty of rational choice, the thing Epictetus considered the only truly free part of a human being, is singular. It belongs to no one else. It cannot be shared. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be activated by someone else's love for you, however deep that love is. Other people can inspire you. They can challenge you. They can hold up a mirror. They can walk alongside you. But they cannot want your transformation more than you want it. And they cannot do the inner work that only happens in silence, in solitude, in the private confrontation between you and the version of yourself you are choosing to release. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Retire into yourself as much as you can, associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. The process is mutual, for men learn while they teach." Notice what he said first: retire into yourself. Before the community. Before the mentors and the friends and the people who challenge you. First, yourself. First, the interior. Because here is what happens when people try to rebuild themselves through relationship or community or external accountability alone. They outsource the work. They make the transformation contingent on someone else's presence. And the moment that person is unavailable, the moment the community disperses, the moment the accountability partner goes quiet, the moment the relationship ends, the whole structure collapses. Because it was never built on the only foundation that holds, your own decided, practiced, daily chosen will. The aloneness the Stoics advocated for was not loneliness. It was the recognition that some doors can only be opened from the inside. And that the person standing at that door, the only person who can turn that handle, is you. Marcus Aurelius had an empire. He had advisors and generals and philosophers and a wife and children and the entire apparatus of Roman power surrounding him at all times. And still, every morning, alone, before the world began, he sat with himself. He asked himself the hard questions. He held himself accountable. He did the inner work in private that made everything else possible in public. That practice, that sacred, non-negotiable, entirely personal daily confrontation with yourself, is where the real rebuilding happens. No one can attend that meeting for you. The beliefs that must be destroyed first. Before you rebuild anything, certain beliefs have to go. Not adjusted. Not reframed. Destroyed, because they are structurally incompatible with the person you are building toward. The first belief that must go is this: I am the product of what happened to me. This is the most seductive limitation in human psychology. Because it is partially true, your experiences have shaped you. Of course they have. To deny that would be dishonest. But the Stoics drew a fierce, non-negotiable line between being shaped by experience and being determined by it. Epictetus was tortured. Literally. His master broke his leg to demonstrate that Epictetus could not control him. And as his leg broke, Epictetus calmly said, "You will break it." And when it broke, he said, "Did I not tell you that you would break it?" He refused, in the most visceral, physical, inescapable circumstance imaginable, to surrender his inner response to external force. That is not superhuman. That is a practiced philosophy. And it begins with destroying the belief that what has been done to you has the final word on what you can become. The second belief that must be destroyed. I need the right circumstances to begin. The Stoics called this the tyranny of conditions. The endless postponement of the life you want until the time is right, the money is right, the relationship is right, the health is right, the confidence is right. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire during a plague that killed millions. He wrote his greatest philosophical work, the Meditations, on military campaigns, intense, in the middle of war. He did not wait for peace to practice philosophy. He practiced philosophy in the middle of everything. The third belief that must be destroyed. Other people's opinion of me tells me something true about my value. This one is particularly insidious because it is so deeply wired into us from childhood. Approval feels like safety. Disapproval feels like danger. And the nervous system that was shaped in a household where love was conditional, where approval had to be earned, carries that wiring into adulthood and lets the crowd vote on its worth. The Stoics were brutal about this. Epictetus said, "If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you but answer, 'He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned only these.'" That is not defensiveness. That is the radical self-possession of someone. There is a moment in every real transformation, before the new discipline begins, before the new identity takes hold, that the Stoics understood intimately, and that almost no self-help tradition talks about honestly. It is the night of reckoning. The night when you sit with everything you have been. When you look, without flinching, at the full, honest inventory of who you have allowed yourself to become. The choices you made that you are not proud of. The years you spent in ways that did not honor the person you knew you could be. The relationships you harmed. The potential you deferred. The fear you dressed up as practicality. This is not self-punishment. The Stoics were very clear about that. Seneca wrote, "I do not agree with those who recommend a stormy life and plunge into the midst of things. Both things must be blended. The man of leisure must live in the world. The active man must sometimes withdraw from it." The night of reckoning is a withdrawal. A honest accounting. Not to destroy yourself with guilt. Guilt is a useless consumption of energy for the Stoic, but to see clearly. Because you cannot navigate accurately from a false starting position. If you tell yourself you are further along than you are, the map you draw will be wrong. If you tell yourself you are less capable than you are, the map will also be wrong. The Stoic practice of evening review, Seneca's nightly self-audit, asked 3 questions. What did I do today that moved me toward the person I want to be? What did I do that moved me away? What will I do differently tomorrow? Not 4 questions. Not 10. 3. And then, release. Not carry the weight of today into tomorrow. Not rehearse the failure until it becomes identity. See it. Learn from it. Set it down. That is the Stoic discipline of the night before the rebuild. The honest reckoning that clears the ground. That makes the soil ready for what is being planted. You cannot skip this part. Not really. People try. They try to leap straight into the new discipline, the new routine, the new identity, without ever sitting with the honest weight of what they are releasing. And the old patterns follow them. Because they were never genuinely examined. Never truly laid down. Sit in the honest dark first. See clearly. Set it down. Then, and only then, begin. How the Stoics rebuilt themselves. The Stoics did not believe in inspiration as the engine of transformation. They believed in practice. In the daily, undramatic, non-negotiable repetition of chosen behavior until it rewired the character. Aristotle, whose work deeply influenced the Stoics, said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. This is not a motivational poster. This is a precise description of how human character actually forms. You are not what you believe. You are not what you intend. You are not what you say about yourself. You are what you do, day after day, when no one is watching, when the initial excitement has faded, when the discipline is the only thing keeping you moving. The Stoics rebuilt themselves through specific, deliberate practices. Let me walk you through the most important ones. The first is what Epictetus called the discipline of desire, training yourself to want only what is within your control. Not the outcome of your effort but the quality of your effort. Not whether you are loved but whether you are loving. Not whether you succeed by external measures but whether you act with full integrity regardless of result. This sounds simple. It is one of the most difficult rewirings a human being can undertake. Because we are trained from birth to evaluate ourselves by outcomes, by the grade, the salary, the relationship status, the number of followers, the size of the apartment. The Stoic rebuild begins with the radical reorientation of desire toward what is actually yours. Your effort. Your character. Your response. Your values in action. When you succeed at reorienting your desire this way, even partially, even imperfectly, something extraordinary happens. You become genuinely undefeatable. Because the one thing you are pursuing is the one thing no external force can take from you. The second practice is what Marcus Aurelius called the discipline of action, doing what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, at the level it deserves, without drama, without complaint, without waiting for motivation. He wrote, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work, as a human being. What do I have to complain of, if I'm going to do what I was born for?" This is the antidote to the modern epidemic of waiting to feel ready. Of postponing effort until motivation arrives. Of treating discipline as something you access when you feel like it rather than something you practice precisely when you don't feel like it. The Stoic rebuild happens in the moments when you do not feel like doing the work. When you are tired. When you are discouraged. When the progress feels invisible. Those are not the moments to rest. Those are the moments when the rebuild is actually happening, in the gap between what you feel and what you choose. The third practice is the discipline of assent, the practice of pausing before accepting or rejecting an impression. Before letting a thought become a belief. Before letting a feeling become an action. Before letting a reaction become your response. The famous 6-second pause. In that pause, that tiny, disciplined, seemingly insignificant gap, you are exercising the only freedom the Stoics considered real. The freedom to choose who you are in this moment. Not who you were. Not who your fear says you should be. Who you are choosing to become. That practice, repeated thousands of times a day, in small and large moments, is how the Stoic rebuild actually occurs. Not through one dramatic breakthrough. but through the accumulated weight of 10,000 small choices, each one slightly more aligned with the person you are building toward. The body is part of the rebuild. The Stoics were not intellectuals who neglected the body. They were deeply aware that the mind and the body are not separate, that what you do with your physical self has profound effects on your capacity for the mental and philosophical work of transformation. Seneca wrote, "Persevere in doing this, and let your days be few and short at first, till you are accustomed to the change, and then extend them gradually." He was talking about the gradual building of physical discipline, the same way you build philosophical discipline. Not through dramatic overnight transformation but through consistent, progressive, patient effort. The Stoics practiced what we might now call voluntary hardship, deliberately putting themselves through physical difficulty not as punishment but as training. Cold exposure, hard physical labor, fasting, long walks without comfort, sleeping without luxury. Not because comfort is evil, but because comfort, when it becomes a necessity rather than a preference, becomes a form of slavery. When you cannot face the cold morning without complaining, the cold morning controls you. When you cannot skip a meal without your entire emotional state collapsing, your hunger controls you. When you cannot sit in silence without reaching for a screen, the noise controls you. The physical rebuild is the practice of proving, to your own nervous system, repeatedly, that you are larger than your comfort requirements. That you can function, think clearly, choose well, and maintain your character even when conditions are difficult. This is not about extremism. It is about the slow, steady expansion of your capacity for difficulty. Because life will bring difficulty whether you prepare for it or not. The Stoic prepares. Every hard training session. Every cold shower. Every day of disciplined eating. Every hour of early rising when the bed is warm and the purpose is still finding its voice. Each one of these is a small act of rebuilding. A small declaration that you are not governed by the path of least resistance. And cumulatively, over months and years, these small acts forge something. Not just a stronger body. A stronger character. A self that trusts itself. That knows from lived experience, not theory, that it can handle more than it thought. Solitude is not loneliness, it is the workshop. Modern culture has declared war on solitude. Not openly, not honestly, but effectively, through the endless architecture of distraction, connection, notification, stimulation that makes it nearly impossible to be alone with yourself for any sustained period without reaching for an exit. And this is catastrophic for the work of rebuilding. Because rebuilding requires solitude the way a workshop requires walls. Not to keep the world out permanently, but to create a contained space where the real work can happen without constant interruption. The Stoics treasured solitude, not as isolation, but as what Marcus Aurelius called retreat into yourself. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. This is not a metaphor for meditation, though meditation is part of it. This is a description of a practice, the deliberate, regular withdrawal from external noise into the interior space where your real character lives. In that space, in genuine solitude, things become visible that the noise of constant connection keeps hidden. You discover what you actually think, as opposed to what the people around you have led you to think. You discover what you actually want, as opposed to what the culture has convinced you to want. You discover which of your fears are real and which are simply stories told in the absence of quiet examination. You discover who you are when no one is watching. And that person, the one who shows up in the honest, unperformed solitude, that is the foundation of everything you are building. Seneca wrote, "I never come back home with quite the same moral character I went out with. Something or other becomes unsettled where I had achieved internal peace. Some one or other of the things I had put to flight reappears." He was talking about the cost of constant social engagement, the way it slowly erodes what you have built in solitude. Not because people are bad, but because the social self is always performing, always adapting, always slightly shaped by audience. The solitary self is the true self. And the rebuild begins there, in the quiet, in the unwitnessed, in the sacred privacy of a person taking full responsibility for who they are choosing to become. Make time for this. Protect it fiercely. It is not indulgence. It is the most essential part of the process. What you are rebuilding toward. We have talked at length about what must be destroyed. But destruction without direction is just chaos. The Stoics were very clear about what they were building toward. They had a word for it, eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but more precisely meaning flourishing, the full expression of a human being living in accordance with their deepest nature and their highest values. Not pleasure. Not success as the world defines it. Not comfort or security or approval. Flourishing. The state of being fully, authentically, courageously alive, doing what you were built to do, in the way that honors your values, regardless of what the crowd thinks, regardless of the difficulty of the path, regardless of the outcome. Marcus Aurelius described the person he was always building toward with a list of qualities, not achievements, not possessions, not status, but character attributes. Justice, wisdom, courage, temperance. The 4 Stoic cardinal virtues. The rebuilt self, the self on the other side of all this honest, difficult, solitary work, is not a self that has escaped difficulty. It is not a self that has achieved security or approval or wealth. It is a self that can face difficulty with dignity. That can lose without being defined by loss. That can be misunderstood without losing its own understanding of itself. That can be challenged without being shaken to the foundation. Because the foundation, the rebuilt foundation, is not circumstance dependent. It is not approval dependent. It is not comfort dependent. It is built on the only material the Stoics trusted, character. And character, real character, is built in exactly the way we have described. In the honest destruction of what was false. In the patient, daily, undramatic practice of choosing differently. In the solitude where the real self was discovered. In the voluntary difficulty that expanded capacity. In the evening reviews that corrected the course. In the morning disciplines that set the tone. One day at a time. One choice at a time. One honest reckoning at a time. Until one day, not suddenly, not dramatically, not with fanfare, you look in the mirror and you recognize someone different. Not perfect. Not finished. Not arrived. But genuinely, unmistakably yours. Built by your choices. Shaped by your values. Forged in the quiet fire of the work you did when no one was watching. That person, that rebuilt, sovereign, unshakable person, was always inside the marble. You are simply removing everything that was not them. The rebuild never ends, and that is the point. Here is the final truth the Stoics offer about this process, and it is perhaps the most important one. You are never finished. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the world. He had access to every philosopher, every teacher, every resource a human being could desire for self-improvement. He practiced Stoicism for decades. And the Meditations, written in the last years of his life, is still a record of a man struggling. Still falling short of his ideals. Still reminding himself of lessons he had learned and needed to learn again. He wrote not as a man who had arrived but as a man who was still walking. And that is not a failure. That is the whole point. The Stoic path is not a destination. It is a practice. A daily, lifelong, never completed practice of choosing who you are in each moment. Of returning, after every failure and every success, to the same essential question. Am I living in accordance with my values? Am I being the person I have decided to be? Some days the answer is yes. Some days the answer is not yet. And both answers send you back to the same place, back to the practice, back to the work. This is not discouraging. Not if you understand it correctly. It means that every single day, no matter what happened yesterday, no matter how far you have fallen from where you wanted to be, no matter how long the road still seems, every single day you have the chance to begin again. Not from zero. You carry everything you have built. Every honest reckoning, every hard choice, every discipline practiced and every failure examined, all of it is in the foundation even when you cannot see it. But you begin again. Present. Awake. Decided. That is the Stoic life. The life of someone who has destroyed what was false and is always, patiently, bravely, building what is true. That life is available to you. Not someday. Right now. Today. In the next choice you make. We have covered a great distance today. And I want to be honest with you before we close, because this channel is built on honesty. What we have described today is hard. The hardest thing a human being can do. It is easy to read about self-transformation. It is easy to watch videos about it. It is easy to feel the rush of recognition, yes, that is what I need to do, and then return to the same patterns because the feeling faded and the work remained. The Stoics knew this. They called it the gap between understanding and practice. And they had no patience for people who treated philosophy as intellectual entertainment rather than a living discipline. Epictetus said, "If you didn't learn these things in order to demonstrate them in practice, what did you learn them for?" So let me ask you directly, what are you going to do with this? Not tomorrow. Not when the circumstances are better. Not when you feel more ready. Today. In the next hour. In the next decision. What one belief are you willing to start dismantling? What one behavior are you willing to practice differently? What one honest truth about yourself are you willing to sit with instead of running from? Start there. Just there. One thing. Today. And then come back tomorrow. And the day after. Because this channel is here every week with more of this, more Stoic wisdom, more honest depth, more of the ancient truth that has been building great human beings for over 2,000 years. If this video gave you something real today, if something landed, if something shifted, do one thing for me right now. Hit that subscribe button. Ring the bell so you never miss a video. And share this with someone who is ready for this, someone in your life who you know is standing at the edge of their own rebuild, waiting for permission to begin. Give them this. Because the world needs more people who have done this work. More people who have destroyed what was false and built what is true. More people who are genuinely, unshakably, courageously themselves. The Stoic path is long. It is hard. It is entirely worth it. Until next time, go do the work. In private. In discipline. In honesty. The rebuild starts now.